Business news, and Brian Quinn joining us in the studio. Morning to you, Brian.
Hey, Will.
Beginning with a big story we've been covering this week, Brazil's presidential election kicking off on Sunday.
Indeed. The country, whoever leads it, is going to face a big challenge economically when they take office. Brazil faces a number of economic headwinds as the country gets set to pick its next leader. Weak growth, high public debt, not to mention the corruption scandals and fines engulfing state oil giant Petrobras. Well, the next president will have to juggle market pressure to implement austerity measures while trying to drag 23 million people out of poverty. Emerald Maxwell explains.
It's Latin America's biggest economy. Yet 23 million people live in poverty in Brazil, 6 million more than in 2014. After 2 years of austerity, followed by 2 more of weak growth, 13 million people are unemployed, and crime is at near unprecedented levels.
Brazil
is one of those countries where a part of the population still lives in the 19th century, while the other is already in the 21st century. This inequality is leading to greater than normal poverty levels. It causes more crime, political instability.
The World Bank says Brazil faces 3 main economic challenges. It needs to raise sustainable productivity, but it faces a major fiscal imbalance and increasing difficulty in providing basic public services. Public debt hit 77% of gross domestic product in July, and the World Bank says it could reach nearly twice that without deep structural reforms. The markets consider pension reform to be the first step, but it's not a vote winner. So though most candidates are proposing it, they're not going into detail. Right-wing frontrunner Jair Bolsonaro wants to reduce the public debt through privatization and sales, while leftist Fernando Haddad says he will increase employment and battle tax dodging to balance Brazil's books.
It's France 24's Emerald Maxwell checking in on the markets now. Here in Europe, markets continuing their slide from yesterday as a global sell-off in bonds drags equities down as well. Investors also looking ahead to a big jobs report due out in the U.S. later today, with analysts predicting a tightening labor market as the U.S. economy roars. That's stoking fears of inflation, though. All major indexes here in Europe off right around 0.1% at the open. We've seen London, Paris, CAC and the Frankfurt DAX all 0.1% off. Over in Asia, most indexes losing ground in Friday trade as well. Shares in Chinese suppliers to Apple fell, with Lenovo losing some 20%, that following a Bloomberg report on spy chips installed on Chinese-made hardware used by Apple and Amazon. Hong Kong's Hang Seng closing down just over 0.1%. Tokyo's Nikkei off 0.8%. The Kospi in Seoul off 0.3%. Shanghai's closed on Friday. Well, next, Elon Musk has taken a mocking swipe at the U.S.'s top financial regulator on Twitter. The Tesla chief tweeted a new interpretation of the Security and Exchange Commission's SEC acronym, calling it instead the Short Seller Enrichment Commission. His latest missive comes on the heels of a fraud settlement with the SEC that will see him pay a $20 million fine. Peter O'Brien has the details.
Tesla's boss has once again put himself front and center. This time for publicly mocking the US's stocks and shares regulator, the Securities and Exchange Commission, or SEC.
The Short Seller Enrichment Commission is doing incredible work, and the name change is so on point.
Thursday's jibe on Twitter references investors who bet on a company's share price falling. Short sellers are known to ruffle Elon Musk's feathers, but they might have done well out of the latest outburst. It sent Tesla's stock down over 4%, and it fell more than 2% in after-hours trading. Relations between the US institution and the billionaire are particularly strained. Last week, the SEC sued Elon Musk for misleading investors after he announced he'd secured the funding to take Tesla private at $420 per share. Elon Musk settled the charge by paying a fine of over 17 million euros, a sum paid out by Tesla as well. He also agreed to step down as chairman for 3 years, though he remains CEO.
Well, finally, for business, a shining example of overkill in American car culture is catching on here in France at just the wrong time. French paper Les Aubes reports that pickup trucks are seeing record sales in France, up 12% for the first half of 2018, up 50% over the past 2 years. This as France and Europe overall are struggling to reach emissions goals set out in the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement. The large, heavy utility vehicles emit significantly more CO2 and fine particulates than smaller cars. A part of the reason for their increased popularity, likely tax breaks from the government, which classifies them as professional vehicles, also exempts them from emission standards. Seems like the kind of wrong class of vehicle to exempt from emission standards, Will. I don't know if they'll
It seems
review
backwards.
That.
Shouldn't the U.S. be following Paris and putting in those smaller, more eco-friendly cars?
Indeed. It's not working out as it should.
The world these days, huh, Brian? Brian Quinn.